everyone who's on here already, you should have a Q&A kind of little box down there somewhere on your screen. You can answer some or ask some questions during it. We will have time at the end to get to those questions. If you're joining us on LinkedIn Live, you can go ahead and comment along or ask on there as well. And then the chat function hopefully should be working for you if I got that set up correctly. If not, we should still be able to do a Q&A. So I think, Greg, it's that time. It's a minute after, so we'll go ahead and get started. Everyone here, thanks for joining us. And we're going to be, this is the second episode of the Arcadia Cognerati MILO sort of Hoberman series, where we're talking about this new process and new episodes that we built for the MILO video trainer. And so today we're going to be covering a few topics, which you all signed up for and saw. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the rules behind cognition as it relates, of course, to training and performance, some of the capabilities, limitations of your eye and brain, some how we can make errors in sense making, how uncertainty affects your performance. And then we're going to get into what is cognitive training? Why do I need it? What will I get out of it? What is cognitive flexibility? All of this stuff. So we're going to be talking about a few things in there. And then so let's go ahead, and it's saying chat is disabled. I'm getting something. Got it. We will try and get that up as we go along. So I will try and work on that as we move forward here. But quick introduction on everyone on the call. We've got Greg Williams, president and founder of Arcadia Cognerati. Greg is the architect of several successful human behavior-based programs, including the Marine Corps' Combat Hunter program, the U.S. Army's Advanced Situational Awareness Training. He's a creator of part of what we're going to be talking about today is HBPRNA, Human Behavior Pattern Recognition and Analysis, which, as I like to remind everyone who comes to our training, that's one of the most difficult things you're going to have to learn to say with anything that we're talking about today. So Greg has several decades of law enforcement and experience, and also was a former U.S. Army soldier as well, and been a subject matter expert in human behavior for many different federal, local, state government agencies, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, and a whole bunch of different other places, both here in the U.S. and abroad. And then you got myself. I'm the Senior VP of Operations for Arcadia Cognerati. Spent some time in the Marine Corps as a sniper, worked for the Marine Corps for a long time after that. Did a whole bunch of different work in high threat protection and working for different government agencies, and been studying, teaching about human behavior for the last decade at least. I have a master's in applied psychology, and been working with all kinds of different folks, both here in the U.S. and abroad, federal, state, local law enforcement, private companies, organizations, focusing on, again, HBPRNA, human behavior pattern recognition and analysis. And then on the call as well right now, who will absolutely help join us at the end too with questions, is Lawrence Joe Kehoe. He's from MILO, and he's one of our training content specialists for MILO. Again, Joe has a law enforcement experience and works with MILO on developing some of their training content. If you've been to any recent MILO exhibitions or any shows, you've definitely probably met him there. And then he worked with us as well to build this Hoberman series, this new concept that we have. And so he's, again, going to be on the call towards the end to help answer any questions. So without that, or without any more than that, Greg, I think that's kind of covers up a lot of our admin stuff. Again, I'll try and get the chat function going, the Q&A. You can always just hop in there in the Q&A, and you should be able to ask any questions in there that we can get to. So, Greg, did I miss anything before we jump in?
No, but to retain your focus, folks, feel free that at any time during the webinar, feel free to just blow up Brian's phone by texting him your personal questions and observations as well. Now, Brian, let's hit it, man.
All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
so what
welcome.
we started talking about today is what we focus on at Arcadia is a lot about sense making and problem solving, what we call a SPAR, which we'll get into. But the idea is sense making and problem solving is something you do every single day. Sense making is just, how do I understand the situation that I'm in? A lot of people kind of refer to this stuff as situation or situational awareness. We just call it sense making, right? And sense making and problem solving. And the idea is we want to get folks better at sense making and understanding their environment so they make better decisions. They problem solve better. And the idea is that leads to more adaptability. And our focus is not something that you have to learn, some nebulous, difficult process, but drawing on your own life experiences, not just from you in law enforcement or security, whatever role you're in, but literally since you were a little kid, you learned the most important lessons and you learned on the playground when you were a child. So understanding human interaction, I can draw on a wealth of knowledge and experience from your own life. You don't have to be an expert in it because you kind of already are, right? We just don't always know how to articulate it. So if I get better at sense making and problem solving, what that does is makes me more adaptable. And what we mean by being more adaptable is you can take someone and put them in a new, novel circumstance, a situation they've never been in before, and rather than becoming overwhelmed, rather than not knowing what to do, they can draw on their own life experiences to assimilate into that environment faster so they understand it and make better decisions. When I get more adaptable, what that can lead to is literally resilience. That's the idea. But I get better at resilient. I become more resilient. I make better decisions. I get smarter, stronger, and faster in a sense. And so I can bounce back from setbacks easier. I can learn from my mistakes. And that's really what we're talking about here when it comes to resilience. So that's a little bit about SPAR and what we do and how we do things. And we're going to talk about that just in general terms of all humans do it. And then how we put this stuff into a training content that you can consume, because that's the most important part, right? All the knowledge and training in the world does not do you any good if you don't do something with it. So how do we operationalize this information? And that leads us to getting better at predictive analysis.
So the problem with predictive analysis is people still don't think you can do it. The idea is if you think of predictive analytics, you can enter that term into your search engine and you'll get 482 million unique answers on that question, but you won't get predictive analysis in the first 10 pages. Why? Because people are afraid to go there. You don't need to be afraid to go there. We're not talking about the magic 8 ball. We're not talking about going to a soothsayer that's going to give you opinion-based testimony based on, as Brian said, nebulous information. Just, the time of day, the day of the week, pardon, whether the crops are floating or the chicken bone is waving at you. Slide, please. So the idea is, instead of relying on tarot cards that you spread out and can have a million answers depending on the person that's looking at it, slide please, let's talk about true predictive analysis. Look, I can look here and see that this is a pair. I can see that I'm ace high. I can see that, well, I almost had a straight and I almost had a flush. I can make those determinations based on the hand that I'm dealt. So the idea is predictive analysis means, can you operationalize information into intelligence and draw reasonable conclusions on what's likely to happen next? Well, if you can do that, think of the power that gives you. If you're not seeing what you devoted to being the likely thing that's happening next, guess what? Things are going sideways and maybe in a hurry. Or if you see those things that are happening in that order, maybe you can say, okay, I'm going to interject these words or these statements or this de-escalation protocol to fix those things that might be happening next. Brian, it's not unlike going to Vegas, right?
Yeah, well, staying, I guess, on the Vegas theme for today, it's not unlike, blackjack, right? If you're playing single deck blackjack, especially, you can learn, it's math, right? You can learn to count cards, right? And understand and predict what likely hand is coming up next on whether to bet more or less. You can do that and be right more times than you're wrong. So much that is, if a casino even thinks you're counting cards, they will 86 you. They will toss you out of there just on the suspicion that you're doing it. Why? Because you're gaining an advantage, right? They don't like that advantage in that situation. Well, that's what all life's problems are. It comes down to some mathematical equation that you can do and that you already do in your head now to determine likely courses of action, dangerous courses of action. But if I don't start with really good sense-making abilities, right? If I don't have good information coming in, the decisions I make aren't always going to be the best, right? Because if bad information in equals bad information out. And so we can have problems or errors in our sense making. So I want to watch a part of this video. It's just a real quick clip. And it's an example of an error in sense making. Example, how things can go wrong. And I'm not here trying to Monday morning quarterback this, right? I'm not doing the look at how bad this person is. We'll explain exactly how any human being can fall into this trap. So what we see happen is a police officer pulled over an individual. The guy gets out of his vehicle, 80-year-old man, reaches into the back of his truck, pulls something out to go approach the officer. And what he was doing was reaching in the bed of his truck to pull out his cane, right? So he could walk over to the officer and communicate with him. Well, that's not what the police officer saw, obviously, and he ended up shooting this individual. And I know what you're saying. Okay, that would never happen to me. I would never do something like that. We need to get better training, but it actually could. It's a simple error in sense making. So he drew an unreasonable conclusion. Well, why would he do that, and how would he do that? Greg, I'll let you kind of jump in here too.
Brian, there was no sound on that. So if you can function test it one time for sound, I'll go ahead and talk until you think you've got it up with the sound. So folks, you just heard us use a metaphor of gambling, okay? You're gambling. The casino's not gambling. The machines aren't gambling. As a matter of fact, when you go through the casino next time, take a look and you'll actually be able to see your odds of winning at every one of the games. So it's concrete evidence that they can pay it forward, the information that they know at the casino, to draw a reasonable conclusion on how much money you're going to lose. Now, this officer is us, Brian. This officer is you and me. And what have they taught us our entire careers? And what do some types of shoot, don't shoot training reinforce? It's going to come at night. The threat's not going to listen to us. And here comes that long gun, Brian, and it's going to be the jack in the box, and we're going to have to take a fatal position and shoot the person. Well, thank God this person lived. And I'll tell you a quick one before Brian tries it with sound, folks. Shelley and I were in the Walmart parking lot in Gunnison, Colorado, and I never could imagine that this situation that we're seeing in Texas could ever have truly occurred, right? And all of a sudden, old guy pulls up, handicapped spot with his wife, takes 5 minutes getting out of the driver's seat. And Brian, you know what the first thing you reach for? His cane in the back bed of the pickup truck. So this could be every one of us. If we're primed and somebody didn't bring us off the gas at on-duty roll call and tell us there's another way, then de-escalation can't happen. We can't clearly see it. Brian, this becomes inevitable.
So what Greg is talking about is those what we mean by is failures in those sense making. So what is sense making involves all of these other things over here on the left: my knowledge, the information, the beliefs I have, the different cognition biases I have, the experiences I draw from, and then the policies and procedures that I've been holding to, right? And that comes into literally, what do I know? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What do I believe? And you've got something in there as well that's working against you in the background, is that's time and distance, right? The closer I am to an issue or problem or potential threat or whatever the situation is, the less time I have to deal with it, right? And that's not always going to give me the best answer. So I have to understand in those situations that almost anyone could fall into that trap, right? Just by making those mistakes, just by understanding what Greg was talking about, priming. When you tell me, right, that the most dangerous thing is going to be me by myself in the middle of the night pulling someone over, well, what do I automatically start to do? Well, automatically, my brain wants to arrive at an answer, right, before I think through the problem. And it will give me an answer no matter if it's right or if it's wrong. So that kind of brings us to our first basic rule of cognition we're talking about today, is that no matter how well trained or experienced you are, all humans, all of us have limits to our cognitive performance. There is only so much we can handle or do at any given time. And so it has to do with not just what your training and education and life background is, but literally your eye and brain, right? What the human processing works, how they work together to give you this subjective view of the world. And I'll go ahead and throw to Greg and let him start with the eye.
Yeah, so I'll go simply. Look, attend one of our courses. If you close by, come in, because we break down on the first day all of these human performance issues. And there's obviously not time during your lunch hour for us to go over all of them. But I will go over a couple, Brian. I'll go over your functional field of view. What separates peripheral to central focus is your functional field of view. It's a lens, and the entire back of your skull is devoted to your visual field, Brian. So all of the information that your brain is chunking comes from the eye. So how do we orient towards potential danger? Well, we orient because light, motion, or edges trigger our peripheral to drive our central, and our whole body turns, not just our head, our entire body turns, so we can orient on what the likely external arousal is and make a determination on whether it's going to kill or eat me. So because our survival orientation is so strong, Brian, it can override our common sense. And I'm here to tell you, that common sense isn't all that common when you're in an emergency situation. Well, what about the brain?
Yeah, so your eye has to take in all those images, right? And it has to throw them back to the brain, and your brain has to try to make sense out of it. It has to make order out of that chaos. It has to put things in a linear fashion for you to understand, right? And it wants to know the answer before you're consciously aware. It wants to feed it to you so that you're never wrong. It's just a simple survival mechanism. It doesn't want you to be surprised by something because that may not turn out well for you. Well, if I look over here on that left side, up closer to your eyes, that prefrontal cortex area, that's that executive thought center, right? We can think and we can talk and we can sit on here and have a wonderful discussion when there is no stress, and we can discuss all of these great different ideas and how to do things. The problem is, right, underneath that pressure, right, when things occur, right, my brain, it tends to have this bias towards my survival. So that limbic system starts to kick in and I will become overwhelmed. And when I become overwhelmed, I'm no longer thinking rationally through there. I'm either responding in some manner of which I train, or sometimes I come up with that blank page and my brain goes, I don't know what to do in this situation. So guess what? I'm going to take over and I'm going to hear for your survival, and cares about that first and foremost. And you have a whole bunch of different things that get in the way of you processing information, because basic rule of cognition number 2 is there is only so much information that we can receive, process, and use in any given time. So we're talking about some of this, the limitations you have, but the point to remember too in this is the other side of the coin. Since there's only so much that we can process anytime, I only need to process so much of it. There are only so many things I need to focus on in any given situation. So some of those limitations that we have is, like I mentioned about your brain trying to make order out of chaos. It uses something called sequencing. It likes things to put things in a linear fashion in an order that it can repeat over and over again. So this young gentleman checking IDs at the base, right? He's got to look for certain things before people can get on. Well, if I look at the first ID and everything checks out, and then I look at the next one and everything checks out, and I look at the next one and everything checks out, my brain already starts filling in that linear set for me. So before the next one even comes up, I'm already primed to think, oh, this one is likely going to be okay. How many times have you heard a story or maybe seen yourself, someone sneaking in a gun or some type of weapon or contraband through multiple people searching and checking them all the way into an interview or interrogation room, right, where they pull it out in there? And you're going, how does that actually happen? Well, if I do things right, and I don't find one, and I do that a few times in a row, my brain's already thinking I'm not going to find it. We also have things like channel capacity and how our brain kind of chunks and understands information and puts it together. So if I'm looking up at the stars at night, man, there's a whole lot out there. That's a lot to take in. So what do we do as humans? We go, all right, well, I'm going to put these together over here, and that kind of looks like a bull, and this one kind of looks like a scorpion, and this one looks like someone who's out hunting. That allows us to process that a little bit better. But again, I have certain limitations. So right now we're sitting on this webinar. We can conduct all kinds of multitasking, polyphasic skills. We can remember all kinds of different items or things and recall them at length because we're fine. We're in a sterile environment where it's unlikely there's any type of threat present. Well, under those circumstances where there is that stress or there is that present, my channel capacity drops, and it drops to 3 basic things. So this is where things come from, like, shoot, move, communicate, tap, rack, bang, 911, run, hide, fight, stop, drop, roll. All of those things are boiled down to 3 basic responses to a stimulus, because under those stressful conditions, I cannot do more, no matter how well trained or experienced I am.
So platitudes are worthless to your brain, but rehearsal is wonderful. So if you get into a situation where you want to think of some of the things that are affecting your human performance, add adaptation to that list. So Brian and I are in a hotel a couple of nights ago, and we're going up in the elevator after training, and the people that are roof tarring the hotel are on the elevator with us with their coolers. And I have to look at the guy and I go, hey, how long does it take you to get used to that smell? And he looks right back at me straight faced and says, what smell? If you have these external influences over time, your brain will start to count them out. They're not going to be as exclusive. They're not going to be as exciting. So imagine being a cop or a first responder or a jail dep or working in courts and corrections, and all of a sudden you're getting these images over and over, and they start to form a pattern. That pattern can actually get you killed. Slide, please. So if we take a look at change blindness, hey, the automotive industry understands that you're not paying attention while you're driving. As a matter of fact, they try to fix you by making a self-driving car. They park from themselves, they drive from themselves. Marin's got an old 87 Toyota. He thinks drives for himself. He's just asleep at the wheel. But the idea here is, as many lights as I put on the back of this Porsche isn't going to matter, because over time, a slow, steady change is going to be missed by my brain because we don't pay close attention. And guess what still happens, Brian? Number one motor vehicle accident is a rear end collision because we're not attending to the car in front of us. So if that can happen, you can get shot on a traffic stop. You can go into a domestic or respond to a call, shots fired, and get shot. That's what we're trying to get at. Slide, please. So if you take a look at the basic rules of cognition, I'll give you number 3. Our capacity to make good decisions diminishes in volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. So understanding that, we have to understand the next couple of rules. Brian, slide, please. First one is, I can be overwhelmed by events. If the information coming in is not being processed, all it's doing is mucking up my signal. And Brian, if I get a muddy signal, crap in, crap out on a computer, you can imagine how that's going to work on my brain. So when I become overwhelmed by events, it's a crapshoot. Back to that gambling analogy, I'm not going to be responding the way that I was trained. I'm going to respond on whatever file folder comes up to save my ass. Slide, please. And you know what, Brian? If I'm overcome by emotion and I don't have a high EQ, emotional quotient, for the situation that I'm in, I could crumble. I could fail. You're telling me the danger is coming at night, and here I'm pulling over this old guy that can't hear me, and all of a sudden he's reaching in the back and fumbling for something. Of course I'm going to come up with that item being a weapon. Psychological de-escalation has to be physiological de-escalation, has to be sociological de-escalation. It has to permeate every essence of my training, or guess what? I might come up on overcome by emotion or overwhelmed by events. Slide, please. So I want to make sure that we understand that when we use sports analogies, and a lot of us do, a lot of us say, hey, we're jujitsu instructors and we're martial arts instructors and we do all these other great things. So therefore, we're in uncertainty all the time because it's us versus them, and it's always a challenge. But it's different. The stakes are different when you're cheering for your team. The stakes are different when you're out on the ice and you understand that you might get your teeth knocked out, but it's unlikely somebody is going to shiv you or try to shoot you. Okay, so the idea is that we have to make sure that we understand that there are certain jobs and certain roles in society where we do become all in all the time. Slide. And one of those is the type of decisions that you're having to make as a law enforcement officer. And we constantly beat ourselves up in the press by saying, well, how could a person mistake this for that? I'll tell you how that happens. You become overwhelmed by events, you've exceeded your channel capacity, and all of a sudden those slow, subtle changes, even though they're at record speed, are happening in front of you. And Brian, all you have to do is miss once. Okay, we're not talking about terrorism where he has to strike once and be successful. We're talking about you every time you step foot out of that scout car. Every time you knock on that door, you have to be right. And Brian, that's overwhelming and it's taxing because as coppers, you're all in all the time.
And that's the issue. Even though most interactions with other humans go exactly how they, should be, how they typically think they will, and oftentimes just mostly completely safe, right? The problem is when it's in a law enforcement realm or domain or security or anything like that, it's the potential for those. The potential for them can go catastrophic. So 1 second you're dealing with what you think is a normal routine issue, and the next minute, the city's burning down and people are protesting. So it's automatically everything you do falls into that high stakes category. Yet we take a lot of what we do for granted, so we don't always realize it when we're nearing and inching closer to that, even when the pre-event indicators are there. So we're trying to understand cognitive performance, Greg. So how do I understand everything we just talked about?
So here's the thing, Brian. I want to make sure that we understand, everybody that's on this call, that Brian and I are still learning, and I've been at this 40 years. Okay, you have to understand that we're only now unpacking corticals of the brain that we're not even sure what they do yet. And I still hear people saying, well, we only use 10% of our brain. You might. The rest of us are using 100%. Okay, and the idea is, Brian, unpacking cognitive performance is going to take a couple of more webinars. And we hope you learned something from the last one. They're free. We hope you learned something from this one, but we're going to pay it forward and we're going to keep giving it to you until you understand how you can modify your own training so you have a cognitive performance part of it, a component of it, not just all the car ramming, door booting, and shooting. Slide, please. And what do I mean by that? Brain games don't work. Okay, there's companies out there that are passing off brain games as brain training. Two completely different concepts. Brain games are fun, but they don't improve your productivity, concentration, or mental acuity. What does that mean? That means that brain games amuse you, but then they're quickly forgotten. What we're looking for is skills transfer. Slide, please. So I'll give you an example. Brain game training causes what we talk about in scientific communities as near transfer. What it means is the effects are no different that you get from practice or rehearsal on anything. So when you're doing that Sudoku or that crossword, you're getting better in the game. You're getting to predict in the game, but it doesn't transfer to your general intelligence, which means that it's not going to impact unrelated tasks. And Brian, unrelated tasks are how we need to pay it forward. Whatever we're learning today, whether it's on-duty roll call, off-duty roll call, formalized training, or a seminar, I have to be able to apply that information elsewhere. Slide, please. So brain games can temporarily improve your mental focus because you're focused on the game. They increase your working memory because what card did they just show? Can I find it in the deck? And they improve your response time to certain external stimulus where? In the game, not in the room, Brian, not in your car parked in the parking lot. And guess what? It only works if they're played repeatedly over a long period of time and they're followed by episodes of structured practice that's repeated. In other words, you have to have a mentor and a coach for a brain game. Well, guess what? You don't need that. While they're fun, they're not transformational. What you need is something that's going to transform your brain for a long time. Slide. And what I mean by that is that you have to see a change in the brain. What's a failure with that, Brian? What's the big problem there?
So one of my favorite games, of course, is DDR. If anyone's familiar with the Dance Revolution, right? And you get out there and you can have a competition to see, the bunch of different symbols pop up. You have to put your hands and feet all over where those correspond. Well, that's great. And it's Dance Revolution. The problem is, and you can just ask my wife, is that this does not make you a better dancer, right? Doing this over and over again will make me better at Dance Revolution, but it's not going to make transfer over to me actually being a better dancer. Just like Greg talked about, there's a lot of companies out there who remembers the Lumosity app, right? Had all of these claims, training your memory and attention and your response time, and it will do that in the game. But even them, we were sued. They were sued by the Federal Trade Commission and had to settle for over $2.5 million because they were making claims that were unfounded and weren't actually true, right? It's a brain game that is fun and entertaining and will get you better in the game, just not necessarily going to transfer over into any other part of your life. So what do I need to focus on? Well, investing in the training that you need, right? How do I not waste money on ineffective training? Well, successful brain training means that the brain actually undergoes a structural change, right? We're rewiring how we recall information, what parts of the brain we use, and we make stronger connections so you can use your past experiences in new novel circumstances. So those are the parts of your brain you don't use every day or you don't practice or rehearse with. And so they actually tend to become weaker over time. And I want to be able to guarantee sustainable positive outcomes. So we think and do most often, especially during training and practice and rehearsal, has to become automatic, right? These new memories become core functions and they impact how we think, how we act, and then of course how we react. And I believe, Greg, they do have a name for something like that.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that there's names for everything. So I'm trying to answer some of the questions that are popping up at the same time. Stop throwing biases at the end of every word and seeing that you could just alphabetize everything. Neuroplasticity has been around forever, okay? And the idea of neuroplasticity is it actually changes your brain structure. So if you can see me, you have axons and you have dendrites, and where they come together, that place that they touch is called the synapse. And the more that you rehearse information going across that synapse, the harder and stronger and faster that connection becomes. So neuroplasticity literally changes your brain's organization by rewiring how those synapses connect and how efficient they become. So it's a function of learning and your experience and your memory, just like Brian said earlier. So why wouldn't you want to take all of those things and have that on a file folder so when you're in a new or a novel or an unfolding, rapidly unfolding, dangerous situation, you'd have all that information to draw from. Neuroplasticity impacts how you learn, how you experience the world around you, how you adapt to that external arousal, that attend to phase. Slide, please. So I want you to understand that it makes your brain more adaptable. It makes it more flexible, and it expands your cognitive load. But guess what? You have to rewire the brain to do it. You can't just jump into a game. You can't just read the platitude on the wall. You can't just tell people, be safe out there at on-duty roll call, Brian. It takes time and it takes work. Slide, please. So I want you to understand the ability of your neural networks to change through growth and reorganization is happening constantly. But the problem is, most of the time, it's when you pull up and say, yeah, number 3, and supersize it, because you're repeating that behavior over and over rather than repeating the training that we want you to think about. So rewiring your brain to function in a way that it hasn't previously functioned is hugely important to neuroplasticity. Slide, please. And Brian, I want to make sure that we draw a line in the sand. Our good friend Brian Willis is probably on the call out there. What do we keep getting wrong about muscle memory, Brian?
Well, muscle memory is a good term for certain things, right? If I learn some sort of movement with my body, some physical way to do something, I have to learn how to draw my pistol and reload, right? Through repetition, you're building that neuroplasticity that we talk about and what people refer to as muscle memory. Now, apparently, no one likes that term anymore because there's people that think that your muscle actually has memory in it. You're on the wrong webinar if that's where you're at with that. But the idea is this is good for certain aspects of training you need to have, right? I need to learn a process, whether it is that jujitsu or ground fighting or whatever physical thing that you're trying to do, right? How to draw your weapon system properly, how to, reduce or fix some sort of stoppage or malfunction, right? Especially in a life-threatening, chaotic environment. Yes, you need to build those repetitions in there. That's not what we're talking about. Right. And not only is that not what we're talking about, that's not going to help you when it comes to that predictive analysis you were saying, when it comes to critical thinking, when it comes to using what I already know as a human being to sense, make, and problem solve in a situation. Right. I have to build in a think rather than a thing. So I look at muscle memory as a thing. Right. But all it is some sort of stimulus happens and I have a response. Well, if I'm walking through my entire life just waiting to respond to everything, your luck's going to run out eventually, right? I don't want to do that. I want to be able to get ahead of it. Back to the predictive analysis stuff we were talking about at the beginning. That's where the goal is to be. I want to be able to think what's likely going to happen next and change the outcome based on my observations, perceptions, and my recognition of what's happening in that moment, right? If all I'm doing is waiting, oh, now I see this, now I can do these next 3 steps, I'm always behind the curve and I'm always going to have to react. And as everyone knows, action is always faster than reaction. So I have to look at what behaviors do I want to change, right? I have to literally list them out. I can yellow pad things. What is it that I'm trying to change here? And sometimes that behavior it can be a little bit nebulous. All right, I want to make better decisions. Okay, that's a good start. Well, what do we mean by that? We can define that. So when we talk about this and how we build this into training programs and how we built this into the Hoberman series that we're building with MILO, is we had to write all that stuff out. What is the task or skill? What is our intent? What is the end state? How do we change the dynamic within the training scenario? How can I deliver this with some sort of unlimited practice over time in small chunks, right, over time versus just trying to get it all in at once, right? And that's what we build in to this series.
And Brian, I wrote down 2 things that you said 3 slides ago: recognition and likelihood. And I want to make sure I drive that home. Yeah. Recognition. Do I recognize that this situation is new, novel, or changing, right? Rapidly unfolding in a way that I haven't predicted. And what's the likelihood that it's going to be a most likely or a most dangerous course of action? If we can do that, we've just done predictive analysis. That's the key for everybody listening. You can do this on your own. So the great graphic that Brian just had up, when he talks about the task or skill, have a specific skill or a set of skills in mind. I want to increase the student's critical thinking skills while improving their problem-solving ability. Okay, so as an adult learner, that means I want to have choices in how I learn. So the format has to change, Brian, because if it's the same, folks, we got the STEM camp live in Virginia that we're doing every day this week, and the kids are rebelling against the lecture format. Why? Not because it's boring, because they just got out of school. They're about tired of lectures. So we have to understand that as a trainer. And if we don't train to that new standard, Brian, then we might lose the focus on the task or skill. Then my intent. I want to give my students a complicated situation that they're likely to encounter on the job. That's beautiful, because adult learners want to know that the information or exercise that they're involved in is relevant to their job title. And Brian, sometimes you got to do that right up in front, because if you're playing a game, if you're playing a mind game on me, well, think of an elephant. And then doing these things, I might resent that. I might miss the magic of the training that you saw when you first saw that card trick, right? I can't play that game. I have to think of the people in the room. They're adult learners. How do I get them from white belt to black belt? Then your desired end state. Okay, so given this set of circumstances, solve for X. That's cool, because adults are practical. They feel like they can self-direct their answers. They can study a little bit and motivate. We do in-person training, and when we're doing the live training, we encourage people to look stuff up on their phone. You know why? Because they're going to be on their damn phone anyway. So we might as well engage them in a new way that keeps us focused on that desired end state. Slide, please. So then we have the rheostat. And simply what that means, my electricians or HVAC people in the audience, is I can turn up the complexity or I can scale it back a little bit. You don't go to the jujitsu class and have the guy pin you on the ground and choke you out and say, there, see you next week. You start somewhere, don't you? Well, as the instructor, your goal is to gauge the student's mastery and then increase or decrease the complexity over time or in the moment. And the beautiful thing is that adult learners want to participate in that portion of it. So tell them right up front, I am going to make this harder as we go along. That's why we have the tact freeze. So I can stop, I can recalibrate you, and I can push you back into the ring, so to speak, right? And then the unlimited practice over time. Look, the reason training has got to, look, everybody on a call has got a training budget. And you're going, well, your training is expensive. Because you get us, okay? You're not getting a crap. We're not sending you a book. We're not giving you a VHS tape and you just play it and repeat the words on there all the time. As a student, I can make subtle changes to the approach again and again and gauge my own level of success. That means that I can do a hot wash in the moment. As an instructor, I can offer assistance or subtle corrections in stride. You can be that mentor, or you can stop and you can be that coach. Hey, get your head in the game. Or you know what? You can be the fellow officer next time, Brian, and suggest a different way of doing things. And at any point, I can rewind tape and go back, and you're going, that's very different from life. Yeah, of course, it's called learning. It's called training. And that's why it's got to be, because if you learned everything on the street, there'd be a lot more dead people out there. You could find me by the smoking carcasses of those people behind me, right? Adult learners need external help. They want your mentoring. They want to be able to improve their skills and see a definite change from the beginning of the training to the end. Slide, please.
So that
Brian,
brings us
how did we do that with Hoberman?
To how we put this stuff into the Hoberman series, right? So this is where we're going with this, and how we transfer or include all of the different concepts and theories that we talk about in here, and how your limits of human processing and perception and decision making, and put it into a training program, because that's the most important part. So the idea is the Hoberman series is created to challenge and engage your brain. Right. So it's not there to see how fast you can, pull your pistol out and shoot something. Right. It's there to think your way through the situation, because those chemical changes occur within the brain each time you're learning something novel or nuanced. Right. When I'm put into that new situation, right, I have to figure it out now. So I'm getting a little bit more brain activation. It's automatically, you're likely to intend to more things in your environment because it's new. Right. Your brain wants to figure out what's going on. And that's going to improve my motor skill and working memory. I can recall this information as I'm at a later date while I'm learning it. And then those structural changes occur, right? Axons and dendrites bind, create a synapse. Myelination occurs over time. Each time you practice and refine that skill, and you see those improvements in sense making and problem solving, coupled with memory retention over time, right? Humans have basically an unlimited amount of memory, and you're going, no way, I can't remember anything. I'm in that boat too. It's about recall, right? It's about how do I create new neural pathways so I can think and bring in all of these other different considerations and thinking points in a timely manner in a real situation. Well, I got to do it in training first. I have to know what assets I have available to me. I have to know what options I have. I have to understand how that new policy from the chief that I signed and probably didn't read, how does it fit into this situation right here? Okay, that's what training is. That's what cognitive training is, so you make better decisions out on the road. And finally, the functional change will occur. Those neural networks accept new mapping, right? That's what we're talking about. And the more you use it, the better and faster your sense-making and problem-solving abilities will come. So if I can do it inside that training environment, right, in and it's cognitively close enough to something that I will see, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be the exact same thing. You don't ever have to train for every single specific scenario that you're going to encounter. One, because that's impossible. First rule of simulation is you can simulate anything, but you can't simulate everything, right? But you don't need to. The beauty is I just have to focus on what are the core competencies, what are the thinking points that I need that will help me in all situations. And then I get really, really good at that. And then my brain will automatically start to use those everywhere I go.
Yeah, and the idea is, remember, let's go backwards to the first episode, and then let's go forwards to the next episode. So the idea behind Hoberman is that we want to rewire your brain using the specific cognitively fidelity-filled repeated input. What does that mean? That means one of your Hobermans coming up is going to be on map recon, and the route that you selected is going to have some conundrums. That means that one of yours is going to be a situation where you're taking a citizen complaint, it goes wildly out of control. Why? Because what we've got to do is build new and strong neurological pathways and synaptic cavities so we can pay that information forward on the street. Slide, please. And you're saying, yeah, but I'm not shooting a lot. Yeah, but you don't shoot a lot at work, do you? Because if you are, you're probably in combat or in a combat zone and you need to look for a new job. Hoberman scenarios are designed to offer that cognitive simulation so we can activate your sensory neural pathways. What does that mean? All of the colors and the people and the phrases that they use and the weather and the external influences matter. And we're going to take the time in each episode to make sure that all of them are there so you can replay Hoberman 1, 2, 3 over and over and over, unlimited times, and always get a different response from your brain. Because if we build that synaptic cavity and if we make it fast and smooth, Brian, we're going to make better decisions over time. Slide, please. So I want to understand that there's 3 things that you as a trainer in the audience have to do to make your training sticky. Number 1, it's got to be complex. Complex tasks force your brain to problem solve, and it engages your creative and critical thinking skills. What does that mean? That means that a complex task is something that I can bite off in chunks over time. If it's just a timeout looking like one of the Alfred Hitchcock films where when's the bomb going to explode? When's the car going to peel out? When's the guy going to pull the gun? Your brain learns nothing except for to play in that moment. How did you do? Where did you shoot him? Those are useless bits of information for cognitive learning over time. Slide. The second part is challenging. And I know I said useless. They're not useless. They're going to help you be better in the moment, in the game, shooting that guy that comes up with a gun. But they're not the type of challenge your brain wants. If you want your brain to grow, you got to treat it like a muscle. What does that mean? That means that you got to have repeated opportunities for me to be challenged within the same game. So a crossword doesn't change the clue and take back some of the letters. A Sudoku doesn't come up to 13 one time and go, so there. But you have to as the instructor, because I have to understand the ML and MD COA can change for a whole bunch of different reasons in my environment. And Brian, the final standard that we're living up to in Hoberman, slide please, is that you have to be able to practice over and over and over again. What does that mean? That means that I should be able to go in off duty. I should be able to go in on my lunch. I should be able to sit with a couple of other people that just came out of Hoberman and talk it through. I should be able to say at on-duty roll call, just in a couple of minutes to Prime, hey, everybody, remember what we learned in that last Hoberman about, look, practice makes permanent. So the more that I practice and the more complex and the more I challenge my brain, the bigger that neuroplasticity is going to get. And that means that I've got the concept down, Brian, and I will be able to use that advanced critical thinking on every future situation. Slide, please. And you're still wondering why that's important. Because when you're that little bucket head on your corner and dad was pitching stickball to you, you never thought that you were going to get off of that T-ball and actually get up on the mound. And then you did. And you started learning about skills and strategy and tactics. And you were able to take that all the way up into your college career, Brian, and you still apply it to your business today. Learning transfer occurs when you apply the training that you're doing now to a future experience. And that's why it's so critical to be able to pay that training forward. Slide, please. So what I like to say, Brian, and the graphics say it best, is that you can increase your cognitive ability. You can increase your cognitive load. You can learn how to sense, make, and problem solve faster, and that will lead you to the ability to make the right decision at the right time for the right reason. Slide.
So what is cognitive training? Well, this is kind of what we've actually just been describing this entire webinar, right? It's something that I have to engage visual processing and promote sensory integration and enhance cognitive flexibility, right? How can I go from a really tense situation where lives hang in the balance down to something that's much more benign, and go back and forth from that, and understanding that those things will come like peaks and valleys of a wave sometimes, and I have to be able to respond and be flexible enough to engage with that, and improving my working memory, right? Learning from those past experiences, pulling out those key elements, right, that we see in all of them, and see how they applied and how they were successful going forward. The term bias has a negative connotation, and it's absolutely not. Likely most of you on this call, if you're a subject matter expert something and you're good at what you do, that's because you created really good biases, and those biases have been very helpful. Now, occasionally that can get in the way of a good decision, and that can get in the way of making the right answer. So I have to be aware of that, but there's nothing wrong with a bias, right? I just want to create biases for action. I want to create good biases. So that's what cognitive training involves. It brings in all of my senses. It brings in my logic and reasoning, right? I have to be able to think and talk through that situation and understand in a close enough realistic environment, right? Doing the app, playing DDR, Dance Dance Revolution, is not going to get me better. However, right, having these discussions, these 5-minute discussions, and implementing all of this into a scenario that you may have already created or done, right, that's what's going to allow me to reason through that. That's why we built that Hoberman scenario. That's why you have a guidebook when you get it. I can follow right along, and it's specific enough to the role, yet general enough that I don't care if you're a 3-person agency or a 3,000-person agency, right? You can modify it and use it to what you have there on the ground, which makes it much more personal and precise to you. And you don't need us to do that. You're already experts at what you do. Just learn from the experts of what we do.
Yeah,
and Greg, sorry, Greg, why do we need this?
That's a great point, but I want to throw this at you when all of the folks were trying to scramble to write down those things on the next slide. Look, this session's being recorded. You'll be able to play it over and over and go back to those sessions. Brian, when we read, and all instructors read the same material, maybe some not as deeply, and maybe some are still waiting to read that next guidebook. But listen, we read about time slowing down during the event. We read about auditory exclusion and focus. Those folks, those are how your brain already works. You don't need to be trained to do that. In your survival moment, that's how your brain thinks always. You're just being allowed to see it, Brian. You're being allowed to see what that focus looks like. And I think that's hugely important, because the cognitive training focus that we have is so you can store and retrieve and organize and apply your reason with information. So when those cues come up, Brian, you're more likely to choose them. And that cognitive training is designed to make you smarter, faster, and harder to kill. So it's adaptive, it's flexible, it's part of your executive function. And guess what? Your brain will choose to go there even if you forget, even if you're overwhelmed by the events that are there. So are you saying that there's a benefit to your old, slow, repeated pattern recognition of your brain? Of course there is. It's the survival mechanism. And are you saying that being able to analyze that now when you're not under stress is important to training? That's where we're at, Brian. We need it so we can reorganize and be able to retrieve that information when we need it the most. And guess what? Information drives intelligence, not reloading skills and ramming a car. Slide, please.
So what am I going to get out of it? We talked about a lot of different concepts in here that each one alone we could do an entire webinar series on, right? We talked about it topically to understand everything that's involved with how we learn, what we should be focusing on, and how we make decisions and understand things. So there's things like cognitive flexibility that this stuff will help me with. Doing cognitive training doesn't just focus on the one scenario I'm using it for. It's for everything. It's for all interactions with any human being, right? I use HBPRNA, sure, when I'm working with, high-speed operators, police officers, security, tip of the spear, life or death hang in the balance type occupations. I also use it with my family, right? If I can't use that same skill set when I'm going to the grocery store, I'm never going to learn it that well enough to use it all the time. So we talk about awareness and adaptability and just having the confidence to make the right decisions because I'm more competent in the skill set, and developing resilience, right? These are all the things you get on focusing on cognition and making better decisions, right? Sense making and problem solving. Those are the things I can, if I focus on those, right? The
Yeah.
tactical situation and the operational situation, you likely already have all of the skills and all of the tools necessary, right? There is no new vehicle that you need to go get, right? There is no new type of less than lethal thing that's going to help the situation, right? So we need to stop looking at a thing with a G and start looking at a think with a K. You have the tools and resources necessary. You have the life experiences. Your training is good enough. So I just need to focus on what am I getting out of this? How do I make better decisions? And how do I understand this better? So, Greg, did you want to? We've got a whole bunch of questions we can get to
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, we
So
do.
I think I'm going to go ahead and take this down. I
Yeah,
appreciate
let's do
everyone for
that.
watching, but I like to start with those questions that are in there that we haven't answered yet. If you have more questions, please keep asking them as we go. We'll stay on as long as you need to, and then of course you can always reach out to us. But I'll take this down for now, Greg.
Yeah, and Brian, let's make a quick recall to everybody in the audience before we jump into those questions. I want you to think back of where you were when you saw the video that Brian showed earlier, and see that guy coming out with the cane and the guy shoots him up. The first instincts are, this is a crappy trained copper. How could you make that mistake? No. The priming that copper received at on-duty roll call wasn't sufficient enough to make them a critical thinker. And you can fix that. Brian, I just recently saw a vid somebody sent in about a copper fighting for his life in a gas station parking lot. The bad guy has a hold of his holster and is fighting with him. I don't know about you, but I can probably do, with my level of cardio and the work that I've been doing in the gym, I can probably do 60 to 90 seconds without failing horribly and having the person that's trying to get my gun stop for a few minutes and give me rescue breathing and chest compressions so I can get back in the fight. Now, you and Joe are different. You and Joe are working out all the time, climbing the ropes in gym class, flipping the tires, doing that stuff. So maybe you have 95 seconds, or maybe you have 2.5 minutes. But the idea is, if it comes to that, Brian, if it comes to that, we've already made a mistake. So what we're talking about is, folks, you're doing great training on the ground. You're doing great driving and shooting training. All of that's wonderful. What we're saying is you got to start investing in the cognitive side of the house, which means the predictive analysis portion and outthinking a cunning enemy. That's what I'm trying to get at, Brian, because if we focus on that, then we won't always be on the mat with ready, go. And if we start from there, there are going to be times, folks, that are on this call that you're going to lose, that you're going to come in second best. And I can't be on there when somebody's grabbing my holster thinking about, hey, I'm about to die. And I'll leave you with this, Brian. I'll leave you with that. Every morning a copper doesn't look in the mirror and go, today's the day I might get killed. I'm never coming home to hug my kids. No copper thinks like that. But a bad guy goes, today's the day I'm not going back to prison. Today's the day that I'm willing to trade a life to get away with whatever crime that I'm up to. And that's where they've got the cognitive edge, Brian.
Yeah, so I think we'll go ahead and jump into some of the questions. I know you were kind of trying to answer some of them as we went along. So if any of those folks that wanted a little bit more of an elaborate answer on what Greg answered you during that, just go ahead and type that in. But there's someone and Andy Reese, appreciate it, always has good one. How does sleep deprivation affect cognitive processing and decision making? So obviously that's your physical performance is going to be affected if you don't have sleep, but more so if I don't know how to sense, make, and problem solve very well in the first place, no amount of sleep and no healthy appetite and no amount of gym time is going to help me. So that's why we focus on what we focus on. There's plenty of other experts out there to tell you about sleep. I know another person asked about ADD, ADHD, how to overcome stuff without meds. That's definitely a question for your healthcare provider and your doctor, and not an Instagram influencer. I see a lot of this ADD, ADHD going around where it becomes a self-diagnosis. So I would focus on that. But we had some other good ones about, mental toughness and how do I increase that? And again, someone said I'm criminal of a program and it has improved my mental toughness. What can I do with that? And that's kind of how we focus on resilience. And it gets into, starts with sense making and problem solving, right? It starts drawing on the experience that I've already had. So mental toughness, those kind of terms can be defined in a number of different manners. Greg, I'll let you go ahead with that one.
I'd like to go with one here. From Ryan Short and Taylor McClure. They were kind of having a sidebar. You mainly apply this to defensive stuff. If you ever applied this to something like cockpits and aviation, you've got to understand that only part of what we do is with MILO. It's a great strategic partnership, and we love MILO Fact. A lot of the other stuff we do is with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, schools, different learning institutions. I will give you one right for cockpits and aviation that will help you understand why we're so fervent about this, and on the way home, and no matter what your job is and whether you're HR. So pilots, one of the crashes that they have occurs because they're in a stall. And the first instinctive survival reaction they have when they're in a stall is to pull the nose up because the ground is below you, and that's what you're trying to avoid crashing into. And if you're a pilot out there and you're in aviation, you know that's exactly wrong. Okay, the idea is to dip the nose, allow the nose to come down, and that's going to increase all your thrust and your lift and your drag, and you're going to get that engine started again. You're going to be able to land. So you have to, no matter how highly trained you are, whether you're a private pilot or a commercial pilot or anything else, you have to understand that these same rules that we're talking about in training have to apply, because if they don't become second nature, you're going to be the same one pulling to get out of that dive to the ground, Brian.
So Greg, I'm gonna throw this one at you. It actually came in from Eric on LinkedIn, but first I want to hit up Courtney had a great one about how would you go about explaining to your chain of command the lack of sleep and poor fitness to health habits or detrimental performance in the field. Now there are a ton of studies out there on that now. And Courtney, I would suggest looking at Andy Reese on here and finding him on LinkedIn, but he can help you with that. Absolutely. There's plenty of research out there to show, and specifically with law enforcement, first responders, shift workers in general, people who work at night. There's so much, evidence out there that you can go with that shows all of those.
Corum, Brian.
Constantly changing your work schedule, not being able to eat healthy, how it negatively affects performance. Absolutely. There's a ton of stuff out there, but Greg, I did want to hit this one up from Eric pretty quick, because it was great. He said, hey, you mentioned a lot of ways brain works, how we improve response time, thought process, etc. Can you give a practical application type scenario that I can take to work tonight on patrol that I can send to roll call to my guys? How many times
I'll give you one right now.
5-minute roll call training? That's why I want to throw this one to you.
I'll give you one right now, everybody that's listening. Grab a folding chair or a regular chair, one that you can lift without getting an on-the-job injury and going home that night. And in on-duty roll call, what I want you to do is have one of the officers role play being a driver in a car, and have you, as the instructor, role play walking up on that car and saying, hey, listen, tonight you might be in this situation where the person that's driving this car is going to choose to drive away from you. And you have to understand that this is what I want you to do. And stand there and simulate pushing off on the car and breaking contact and getting distance away from the car. Because we all know if we hang on, that's a bad situation. It's going to drive us to shoot the person or spray the person or, tase them, and then they're going to crash, or we're going to fall too near the car and they're going to drive over us, or it's going to be a scrum. It's going to be a bad situation. So you, with that chair, then rotate other people through the position of being the driver and then pushing off of the imaginary car. Will your brain get it? Yep. Will you prime those people in roll call for that very deadly situation? Absolutely. So little chunks of information over time are hugely important, Brian. And I know you want to jump to the next one, but Raymond Geisen, if I'm saying that right, you've got a great question on there. What rote does Hoberman Series offer? It's not. And you make a great connection to Magpul Dynamic. There's the 5-stage draw, or the tap, rack, and bang is actually tap, reduce, tap, do all those other things. That's great. Your brain doesn't have a laminated list, Raymond. The idea is that what you want to do is go back into Hoberman 1, 2, 3, whichever Hoberman series that you've got, and play it with a different likely outcome. Okay, what if I take charge from the very beginning because this officer's failed to thrive? What if I say, hey, officer, we need a break for a minute. You folks continue what you're doing, and step back and go, hey, where's your head, man? What's going on? That's a duty to intervene, right? So the idea here is it's not rote. It's different every time that you come into it. And who makes it different? You do. The screen, the trainer, and the person going through. Yeah, right? Absolutely. I think that's the beauty right there, Brian. I think the idea is that the skills that you guys teach now, and you ladies that are out there that are doing the training, are excellent skills. But you can't apply a, quote, muscle memory skill to the cognitive realm. What you have to be able to do is adapt and overcome using critical thinking by making a connection on what's likely going to happen next. And that's the beauty of going back into Hoberman. It can be as different as you want it to be as many times. And I hope that answered for a practical Thank
No,
you
it
for
did.
tonight's on duty
And
roll call.
actually, what you just mentioned here at the end, Greg, kind of ties into what someone brought up, which is something we do get. And people, I see this a lot because especially from the thinkers, especially from people who are really trying out there and trying to take in all this information, understand it. But it said what Mike said is in regards to SPAR and predictive analysis, how would you recommend overcoming the paralysis by analysis,
Yeah.
a loop that I see all too often in my field, especially when it comes to a more technical incident? That's a great question. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
I will say this. I will say
Yeah.
there's a bunch of Greg. First of all, Greg Prim, great question. You got to hot wash everything. You got to take a knee after every call and go over what goals were met and what goals weren't, because if not, you're not supporting your agency, Brian. Steve Albanico, I apologize for butchering names, Steve. Are training scars real? You're damn right they're real. The things that you leave out of training, Brian, or the things that you add to training without using the cognitive realm of possibilities. Look, you can, the video that we saw leaves a training scar. So we have to fix that scar, because most people, Brian, that are going through and they're how many sites do you have now where a guy comes on and goes, don't let this happen to you, and then shows a video? That's horseshit. And pardon my language. That's not how your brain learns. What you got to do is you got to break it down and say, what were the choices that could have been made left of bank before this incident occurred, where we could have de-escalated this, where we could have intervened, or Brian, where we could have gotten the scout car, put it in the everybody, you got the P, N, D, U on that scout car. You can put it in and back up and stay away from the situation, give yourself more time. You're not on a timed event. There's nobody that's going go to every police call that you go on. So start giving yourself the gift of time and distance. And I know that's a lot, Brian, but I think that we go back to what you said. You said a 3,000 person agency. What about a 30,000 person agency? You know what keeps happening? Your best and brightest keep rising to the occasion, and case law is written about the one that didn't get the training. Think about that for a minute. That's a lot of money that you're using right there, right? And so I would use on-duty and off-duty roll call also for a hot wash. Hey, listen, last night that was great. Last night, we all made this mistake. Brian, who's the first person to speak in an AAR, and what do they say? It's you, and you stand up and go, hey, this is where I screwed up. I should have definitely done this. Those type of things. Look, you're saying, yeah, but I got to get out on the road. Nobody's covering the road. Yeah, hold the other shift over a few minutes. This information that you're doing cognitively is the most important thing, and it can save a life tonight. Joe, you've seen that. Brian, you've seen that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, and Stephen brought up a bunch of good stuff too. Again, what is a low calorie way to prime our guys, our training scars real? And that's what we were talking about. That's actually what Eric was asking about too. What's 5 minutes, that I can do before, roll call or at on-duty roll call. That's the best training you're going to get. And here's why. It's in the moment. It's something that pertains to something you're likely going to see. And it is that priming. Like I always tell people, one of the things I do in the morning, brushing my teeth, I say, someone may try to kill you today. Not it's going to happen, not be prepared, look around every corner. That's hypervigilance, and that's not going to work, right? It's unsustainable. But it's something enough to prime my brain to go, okay, should probably make sure we're doing that. Now, if you're in whatever that is, whatever you see happening, I always keep it to something that's relevant, right? And then what is a low calorie way to prime? Okay, here's what we're seeing. Here's what we typically see. So go out now and see if you find a higher location of that type of vehicle in this area. So now running in the back of my mind while I'm going through doing all my work and normal stuff that I do, I've got that little, it's in a sense, it's a brain game, right? But this time it does what? It's pertaining directly to what your job is and what that recent significant activity is, what that policy or procedure is that came down. Hey, the chief's directive said this. Go out there and give me an example, or when you're talking to someone, of where you can use that or apply that, and report back to me at the end of your shift. I mean, those small things, those discussions, those 5-minute things where you hit, here's the one thing I want you to focus on today, right? And remember it in these situations. That's actually that has exponential benefits versus going through an intensive long training course where some of it gets left on the wayside because you're going to get it all in. Those small chunks that you can do every day, that's key. We love that. And that's the idea too behind the Hoberman and the video stuff, because we can capture it. And then you're going to have a really great conversation with someone in there about a potential spiral. And then you go, dang, I'm going to write that down. And now the next person, the next time they come through, hey, what about what this happens? And now you're adding to that, even though it's the same film type of scenario, you're literally turning it on its head and coming from a different perspective. Now you're looking at it from this angle. That's the idea. And once I mastered that, I apply it to every other scenario. So, Greg, I don't know what other questions we wanted to get to on here as well.
No, here's my thing too, folks. You know that we limited it to an hour only so the folks on their lunch hour could get it. I say write your questions to Brian. We respond to everything. I say write your questions to Joe. Milo responds to everything. We've got nothing but a great stream that's there. Listen, I don't want you to think there's any competition. There's such great training out there and incredible webinars and other people that are doing such great stuff. We're the only ones in this space, and we'd love to talk to you about it. We want you to make sure that you tune in for the next live webinars. If you're a training person, you got a very specific question, write it up. Write it to Joe, write it to Brian, and we'll get back to you with it. And you know what? If it's good enough, we might do an entire podcast episode about it, because a lot of those questions were very detailed and very good questions. And look, we don't have all the answers. We have an answer. We're the best in this space for this answer, but that doesn't mean it applies to everything. But if your training doesn't apply to every aspect of your life, then you need to rethink your training budget.
Yeah, and again, to when it comes to that stuff, you had a great one. It's the about who the training for. Is it for a seasoned older vet? Is it for someone younger? Is it harder to do as a person gets older? So the beauty of it is obviously, when you have someone that's young, I look at a kid, right? Kids are constantly learning. That's all they do every single day of their life, that they have to learn how to do everything. So they're a sponge. As you get older, it gets a little bit more difficult. But the other side of that coin, as you get older, you gain what? Well, you gain experience. So now technically you have more things to draw from when you learn. So what that means too is with folks like this on the call, when you have subject matter experts, it's called accelerated learning. You don't need to go through some long, slow, drawn out process that a child does because they're starting at nothing. You're starting at a higher level. So, hey, let's go. Let's not waste our time. Let's move through here. We talked through a lot of concepts today, right? And in a very, very short amount of time. Why? Because you're adults, right? And you're subject matter experts. I'm not going to waste your time talking about something that's very slow or very basic. No, let's hit it and let's move. And let's learn how to apply it. So that's the beauty of the difference between the two. But I would say you both gain something different out of it, right? Yeah,
and I love the Robbie Murdy question, Brian. Is this harder to do as a person gets older? Everything's harder to do when you get older. and bourbon does help, but let's not do the drinking thing. But look, she said, when sending staff to training, do I send the seasoned older vet or the younger with less experience?
Yeah.
You know what? What a great question. I'd send one of each. First of all, there's no limit to how many people your unit can send to training, or you can bring that training in for a regional approach right to where you are, or go straight to Milo. Milo hosts training, folks. You haven't asked that. Ask Joe when it's coming up. It's going to be coming up. Joe and Amanda are hosting it. The idea here, though, is look, if I take a seasoned Rose vet and I put them with a brand new person, think of the perspectives that are coming back to your agency, and demand that anybody who goes to training, they come back and that next roll call, they say, hey, this is what I learned. This is what I saw. These are the 5 fundamental truths or whatever, Brian, that I learned from the training. I love that stuff, because if you only send new guys, right, they're going to, what does a new guy do? The first thing you give them, they put it on their bat belt, and it's the only thing. Everything pales in comparison. All training is ridiculous. And you get the old guy and they're going, I've seen it all. I don't want to do it. You send both of them, they'll hold each other to a higher standard, I think. And again, Brian, we don't have a limit on our training. So is it harder to achieve? Of course it's harder to achieve. But you know what? Practice is the key. And guided practice, mentored practice. So we can't show up to every one of your agencies. So what did Milo do? They built Hoberman. So Hoberman can be at your agency, and you can learn by just opening the book and reading it and playing along at the same time. So are we going to make mistakes? Of course we are.
No, and that ties into what Greg just put up there too. He said, neuroplasticity reportedly is harder to achieve as you get older. But are you saying we can maximize it based upon experiences, be able to connect them to prior experiences? That's exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right? You can take this and go, now look back and go, oh man, if I would have known this in these past 17 incidents, right? You all have something now that you can look back on and go, man, if I would have known this, I would have had an extra second to make a better decision and had a better outcome. Well, now that you know that, that's everything in life you can go back on, right? And you can relate it. I relate things from combat to discussions with my
Exactly.
family to something, something I had with my neighbor the other day, and how their kids interact with me and my kids. So it's completely universal when we talk about this stuff. And the more of those connections I make, right, the more I have to draw on, right, and that leads to that adaptability. I don't feel
Yep.
that feeling of, wow, this is new to me anymore. I rapidly assimilate, and now I can find incongruent behavior, or I can find what it is that I'm looking for much easier if I focus on that sort of that
Yeah.
white belt baseline level.
And somebody had a question, a compound Stevens question of earlier about training scars. I know there's a great group of guys that are going to do a webinar that's coming up about training scars specifically. I'll tell you this, I'll give you a good one and a bad one. A good training scar, a guy that dressed in yellow from head to toe a long time ago, John Peters, that probably taught at your academy, folks, if you've been a cop for a while. And John Peters, when he was doing weapons retention and disarming, would come into the gym after everybody had been disarmed and they're wearing their gun belt and their on-duty holster. And Peters would walk up to random people and rip their gun out of their holster, physically yanking it right off their belt and hand it back to them. And chiefs of police argued, and he got thrown out of the Macomb Academy, and all these things happened because people were saying, dude, you destroyed your holster. That's a good training scar. Go spend a couple of bucks and get yourself a damn good holster. Now I'll give you another one, and I'll non-attribute because Shelley's very close to this, our CEO. There was a copper that was an FTO, and when the FTO and the younger officer left the jail, the officer neglected to take the key, unlock the lockbox, and take their weapon back on the road with them. So they went out, they went to lunch. That FTO called a bunch of other FTOs, and everybody met at a location in town. And right in the middle of everybody at that location, they said, hey, do me a favor, stand up, wise guy, and show everybody here that you don't have your gun in your holster. You failed for today. Walk back to the PD and find your gun locker. Okay? That's a scar that you're not going to be able to unring that bell. So scar tissue can be good for you. It can be therapeutic. It can heal. It could be a mark that you look at all the time, or it can be the thing that deep sixes your career and puts you on a trajectory to doing bad things and just not giving an F when you're on the road. Remember that. Remember that you're the trainer. You people listening to this are responsible for how I learn and what I learn and when I learn. Sorry, Brian, pretty detailed on those two, but they still stick with me all these years later.
Yeah, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we still have a whole
There's
bunch
still
of folks
exactly.
on, so I'm more than happy to stay on.
Exactly.
So that's fine. I know some people were asking about kind of the history of the Hoberman series came about, but
Yeah.
it's just taking our concepts into what MILO does, right? People use video trainers. There's a lot of value in them. We didn't always think, Greg and I, our opinion, that they were always, let's say, not used to their full potential. They were great tools for certain aspects. And then I think we always thought there was a lot more. MILO obviously saw that and said, yeah, we'd love to see what that means to you guys. And then so we worked together to build how that would work and putting in the problem solving and thinking into their system, because theirs is great because it works all the time. It's already established. People know how to use it and it's wonderful. So we said, well, let's not change that. Let's add in this additional value level to it. Let's add in all these complex decision-making things that we can do to really get the full use of it. So now you still have all of those, the same great stuff you have from them, now with an ability to do even more. So now we can take it. And so what we're trying to really do is bridge that gap to, okay, I'm in a video training series and then I got to leave and I got to go to work. I got to go do it for real. Well, that gap right there needs to be filled, right? You need to be able to connect that from what you do in there to something out on the road. And we think like adding our sort of a special sauce of HBPRNA is what's going to do that. We think that's going to help with that much better.
And Brian and I are no neophytes to this. We've been in machine learning and AI now over 18 years, working with Department of Defense, working with DARPA, working with IARPA, working with different organizations. And some of you that are on the call, you know this. And the idea was what we want to do is make the training better so it includes a cognitive component. Your training is great. The idea is, can it be better? Yeah. And how do we enhance that? We can enhance it with a smell generator, not so important. We can enhance it with a sound generator, not equally as important. We can improve cognition, and apply it to every new situation that you go into on the road outside the wire. And guess what? That's the key. It's going to take a while. We're not there yet, but it's getting there. And with your help, with you keep coming on the webinars, we're going to make it better. And the proof is going to be in the pudding. We know that neuroplasticity works. Can we prove it in your agency with your officers? We say yes. We say give it a try, and you'll see the change. You'll see that de-escalation can't just be a buzzword. You're going to see that you can't just say, hey, you have a duty to intervene and make it enact it as a law or a code or a policy, and that it's all of a sudden magically going to be there. There's no Harry Potter's magic wand. It's you. It's you and your agency and the trainers in your community.
Yeah. So I think we kind of hit. I'm trying to go through and make sure we hit a lot of
like
these,
I said, if not,
these questions.
they can write us.
And they can always reach out to us for more or any information that they want to reach out to us and Milo. So please remember to do that. And you know, we again, this is the second webinar we did. You know, we had the first one. This is our second one. We're going to have more to slowly build to not only talk about, you know, training in general, but how that relates to the Milo Cognitive and the Hoberman series that we built. Obviously, that's what we want people to understand and learn. We, of course, have in-person training. We're going to be offering some of that too as an enhanced level in a sense to folks who are Milo customers that want to learn more about this Hoberman series, and specifically a lot of trainers and folks that really want to utilize it. Yeah, we're going to be able to do that with you. And that's the goal here, is to get you better at the things you already have, and you know, bringing in this cognitive realm at the actual street level and not just from a theoretical concept. And that's our big goal. I mean, we can sit here and talk about the science behind it all day long, and we can have people that are much smarter than us come on here and say, yeah, that's what the science says. But the most important part is, how does it actually work on the street? And that's where we like to focus on. That's where Milo is focused on. So with that partnership, we really love it. So we you know, appreciate all of you for tuning in and staying on for so long. We'll reach out with like a link so you can rewatch this and everything. And please feel free to reach out to us. And then, I don't know, Joe, is there anything else we want to add from the Milo side? You know, please hop in now and let them know.
Well, thank you for joining us. Again, questions, send them our way. But it has been great to work with Brian and Greg and take our existing product, the development of the cognitive division, and work in this Hoberman series, taking single small scenarios, and now it can be your whole day's training, and that's the beauty of it.
Yep. And Joe, I would add one thing. Thanks to Joe and Amanda and Milo for supporting Brian and I in Arcadia. Thanks also to Max, who is now 9 days old and is responsible for all those new wrinkles on Brian's face. Yeah. Brian and his lovely wife just had a baby, Max. So shout out to you.
We did, and he's doing well. I finally got to sleep the other night. So, and then, I appreciate it. Someone said, shout out to your Instagram stuff. It's always interesting. Thank you. If you're on our Instagram, it's kind of like if you walked past one of our classes and you poked your head in for a second, that's kind of what you're getting. So if you want the real thing, it's about 1,000 times better in person, but we try to give as much way as we can. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. Again, you can reach us, you know, Brian Marin at arcadiacognerati.com, or LinkedIn is a great one. Look us up on there. Same thing with Joe at Milo. You'll get an email follow-up from here probably tomorrow with a link for the recording. And so again, we have the Left with Greg podcast. You can check us out on there. We appreciate everyone tuning in, and I think